30 years and 30 minutes. A catchy title for tonight's program, but an appropriate one. The past 30 years have flown by with people, paper, promise, and projects, each evolving, as has our community's history over the past 121 years. Let us tell you the story. Inspiration for creating their Jewish Historical Society of Southern Alberta, incorporated on July 4th, 1990, can be attributed to the vision, passion, and persistence of Jay Joffe. Some years earlier, Jay happened to attend a meeting held at the Southern Alberta Pioneers and their descendants, the log building up on Rideau Hill. As he perused the photos of Southern Alberta's pre-1890 pioneers lining the walls, he was astounded to find a portrait of his own grandfather, Jacob Diamond, proudly displayed as an Alberta pioneer. Indeed, Jacob and Rachel Diamond had settled in Calgary in 1889. The realization that he was a descendant of a pioneer was very meaningful to Jay. First of all, it meant he could join the Southern Alberta Pioneers organization, which he did. Moreover, he became so involved that by 1991, he was elected president. He even represented them in the Stampede Parade about 80 years after the first parade in 1912, which his grandfather had attended. Second, and more significantly for us, Jay realized that his grandparents' involvement in the early development of Calgary meant that Jews were actually pioneers, not merely later immigrants. The Jewish community had established an early presence here, which implied that it had a long, storied history that should be acknowledged. Who was going to preserve and tell that story, if not members of our own community? Jay, being Jay, did not let that question rest. He became intensely involved with the organized Jewish community. He attracted a number of friends and acquaintances who were interested in preserving community history. He enlisted the help of Mel Nagler, Henry Gutman, Dinah Spindle, and Aggie Romer Siegel. Jay also approached Calgary Jewish Community Council for moral and technical support. Hal Joffe and Bob Califf enthusiastically answered the call. 1989 was an opportune time, since it marked the 100th anniversary of Jacob and Rachel Diamond's arrival. Jay leapt into action, gathering good people around him, including Trudy Cowan and Jack Switzer. They realized that the necessary first step was to confirm what relevant historical information and material, documents, photos, and such, had already been preserved. Fortunately, in the 1970s, the Glenbow Museum and Archives had embarked on a project documenting the historical presence of Calgary's ethnic communities. David Spindle was one of their field workers, and he had gathered substantial material from Jewish individuals and organizations for the Glenbow collections. In 1989, with an Alberta Historical Resources Foundation grant, a project was undertaken to list all extant material relating to local Jewish history. The result was the publication of Shorashim, researched and edited by Robert Payne. Another part of the project, spearheaded by Trudy Cowan, was to conduct oral interviews with 15 longtime Jewish residents. In addition, volunteers were recruited to help the Glenbow Archives sort and describe the holdings pertaining to the Jewish community. On June 6, 1989, the Calgary Jewish Center hosted a meeting marking 100 years of Jewish history in Southern Alberta, featuring talks by Dr. David Berkeson and Trudy Cowan. The meeting also featured a display that had been prepared for the 80th anniversary of Congregation House of Jacob Mikveh Israel. 40 people attended that first meeting, as well as the following one, which featured Glenbow archivist Doug Cass. There was obviously an interest in local Jewish history, so steps were taken to gain status as an incorporated society. Zvika Anosh, Trudy Cowan, Henry Gutman, Jay Joffe, and Drew Staffenberg signed the provincial government application, and on July 4th, 1990, the Jewish Historical Society of Southern Alberta was officially registered. To quote from our early bylaws, one of the objects for which the society was established was to collect, preserve, and make accessible for public benefit the history and artifacts of the Jewish people of Southern Alberta.
Within a couple of years of incorporation, the basic infrastructure of the JHSSA had been established and its mission was being realized. The very first issue of the Society's journal Discovery, fall 1990, was published with Sid Macklin as editor. For 30 years, most of them under the helm of Jack Switzer, Discovery has been a steady link to our membership and to the wider community. Our society has managed to make it available to all Jewish households free of charge. It has not only informed them of our many programs and projects, but has also featured many items from the JHSSA collections, be it oral histories, iconic photos, business stories, or historic milestones. Discovery has featured our pioneers, our leaders, and our youth. It has celebrated the history of our communal organizations, our schools, our synagogues, and camps, and also highlighted our contribution through the stories of our cattlemen, businesses, and leaders in the arts and philanthropists. When errors and inaccuracies have crept into articles, our readers were quick to voice corrections. One unforgettable and regrettable blunder was the 2002 reference to the former Calgary mayor as the late Jack Leslie in a comment accompanying his wife's article about her memories of Rabbi U.S. Ginsburg. We were quick to publish our apologies in the next issue after Mr. Leslie informed us that, quote, reports of my death are greatly exaggerated. To set the record straight, Mr. Leslie passed away in 2010. Early on, financial support was forthcoming from many sources, including the Alvin and Mona Libin Foundation, whose grant enabled us to launch our library collection. Calgary Community Council, through the Calgary Center, helped at the beginning with administration and secretarial support. In addition, there have been countless individual, family, and corporate donations and bequests, large and small, that have bolstered our programs and projects. One very meaningful early bequest was that of Minnie Gorash, who, after being honored as an 80-year-old in 1981, and despite being a person of modest means, left a much appreciated donation to the Society to help further the work she felt was so important. With the support of our volunteers, other continuing sources of income were also instituted early on. Our first casino was held in 1992, tribute cards were available by 94, and the first sponsorship of a Discovery issue came in 1997.
The format of our society's first AGM in 1991 might seem familiar to our loyal members. The program featured voices of our pioneers with readings by Laura Schuler and Arnold Dvorkin from the journals of the Baltzan, Sereth, and Hackman pioneer families, as well as excerpts from other documents. And for the first time, heritage certificates were presented to honor 80-year-old community members. Since that time, our AGM programs have featured visiting authors, experts, and politicians. But the most popular annual meetings have highlighted our own stories about letters, small town life, heirlooms, volunteers, music, and more. Presenters and audience members alike have enjoyed hearing the words of fellow Calgarians living and long past. Our winter and spring programs have taken us from the Cairo Geniza and the Vilna Ghetto to the Yukon Gold Rush. Our historian laureate, Harry Sanders, has led us among the graves of the Earlton Cemetery and through the streets and avenues of historic Calgary, as well as through fond memories of the Palliser Hotel. As a way to build up our collections, and in order to reach a wider audience, as well as to celebrate Canada 125, Jewish Historical Society put out a call for material to include in a historic photo exhibit planned for 1992. That call for photos and documents, as well as for volunteers and sponsors, was well received, and astonishingly, on November 18, 1992, at the Calgary Jewish Center, our exhibit, Land of Promise, was opened by Dorothy Golden, daughter of Jacob Diamond. The exhibit depicted our history up to 1945, and the occasion also featured a song by our wordsmith, Therese Nagler, performed by Laura Schuler. The exhibit later moved on to Fort Calgary, the Beth Shalom Synagogue in Edmonton, and in 1994 it traveled to the Vancouver JCC. 1992 also saw the start of our cemetery file project. We started by collecting obituaries. Then, aided by funds from a government student employment program, 1,500 local Jewish gravestones were photographed, translated, transcribed, and cataloged, all within a year. This would be an appropriate time to acknowledge the work of Jay's friend, Derek Boddington, the retired photographer whose expertise helped us with Land of Promise, the cemetery photos, and many society programs. When Derek undertook to photograph the graves and gravestones in the Jewish cemeteries, he wanted clean pictures of each one. Diligently, he removed all those stones that visitors had left behind. The photographs are indeed clean and an excellent record, but unknowingly, he left out part of the story. This tale is more than an amusing anecdote. It is also a reminder of how important it is that we ourselves have a say in how our history is being recorded and preserved. By 1993, our operations were varied enough to warrant an office, and a small space was rented from the Calgary Jewish Center, staffed by volunteers for very limited hours. Welcome, Naomi Kerr. As the years passed, we acquired a Pentium computer and paid staff, including Annette Friedman and Aggie Romer-Siegel, as well as a number of consultants for various projects. We established regular office hours and rented space for our archives. Display panels were purchased and set up in the Jewish Center entrance in order to mount rotating themed displays to share our many historic photos with the community. It can be said that the framework of Jewish Historical Society as we know it had been formed by 1994. We had developed a working relationship with Calgary Jewish Community Council, the Calgary Jewish Center, and with the Glenbow. In June that year, the Canadian Jewish Historical Society held its annual conference in Calgary, and the Calgary Jewish Community Council and Jewish Historical Society hosted their Community Day with open lectures for all. A local and national presence was in place.
Jay was not one to rest on his laurels, and so he was soon ready to embark on the next big undertaking for the Society, the publication of a book. He had been advised by visiting historian Harry Gutkin, the featured speaker at our 94 AGM, not to begin an expensive project unless prior funding had been secured. Advice well taken. The drive began, and volunteers and sponsors rallied. The 1995 AGM featured a preview of the planned Land of Promise publication, and the next AGM saw the launch of the book. The limited and numbered edition of 1,000 copies soon sold out. Many have recollections of Mel Nagler proudly recording the sale of each copy of the book in his special ledger. Therese was relieved and happy as the pile of books in their basement diminished. Since 1992, we have been building upon these early foundations. We have expanded our partnerships to include the Chinook Country Historical Society, Historic Calgary Week, the JCC at its Jewish Book Festival, and other special programs, the Beth Tzedek Congregation with the community's annual annual J. Jaffe Memorial Program at the Calgary Jewish Film Festival, and many other program partners. We have also worked with other local congregations and organizations. The Society supported the Jewish Genealogical Society of Southern Alberta, whose work we have tried to continue through our many genealogy programs and workshops. Jay was instrumental in helping establish the Jewish Archives and Historical Society of Edmonton and Northern Alberta in 1996, and we have continued our close relationship with them, as well as with other Jewish archives and historical societies. Our relationship with the Canadian Jewish Historical Society, now the Association for Canadian Jewish Studies, has continued as well. Our archivists have contributed to their journal and presented at many conferences. In 2016, the national conference was again held in Calgary, and once again, we had the pleasure of hosting their Community Day. Our society has maintained efforts to include Alberta Jewish communities outside Calgary. Programs have included tours of Rumsey Trochu and Lethbridge. Our board has included directors from Lethbridge and Medicine Hat. We have collected oral histories and have offered programs and articles featuring life in small towns and on homesteads. Our education kit for the Grade 2 Social Studies curriculum, developed by Riva Faber, focuses on the Montefiore colony. Our cemetery file has expanded to include the Jewish gravestones in Lethbridge and Medicine Hat, as well as those in Calgary's newest cemetery. These serve as an important resource for the frequent requests we receive for information about family names and birth and death dates. Thanks to the efforts of the many volunteers, led for many years by the tireless Bertha Gold, our oral history collection steadily continued to expand, and we have been able to record the stories of a wide cross-section of our community. This resource is invaluable for preserving and transmitting our history. In order to ensure that many more stories could be preserved, our society successfully secured a multi-year grant for our Voices of Experience project, headed by Judy Shapiro, which, through the efforts of volunteer interviewers and transcribers, has recently added 50 more interviews to the collection.
The success of the Land of Promise exhibit and book for which the office still receives requests, led Jay and the board to consider mounting a follow-up exhibit that would recount local Jewish history beyond the war years. However, A Joyful Harvest was not meant merely to be an update on the earlier exhibit. Timed to celebrate Alberta's centenary, it was a chronological account highlighting significant people, organizations, and events in each decade. Again, a crew of dedicated board members, volunteers, and sponsors contributed to its success. This was a major undertaking, and the Society was fortunate to have Roberta Kerr and Maxine Fishbein come on board to help with administration, research, writing, and editing. It was a proud moment for the entire community when Lieutenant Governor Norman Kwong opened A Joyful Harvest at the Beth Tzedek in November 2005. It turned out that he was among old friends. It was touching to witness his joy at reconnecting with Ayala Manelson, a friend from his youth. Within the next 5 years, the exhibit traveled to the Esplanade in Medicine Hat, the Provincial Archives in Edmonton, the Glenbow Museum, and to the Vancouver JCC. It was remounted at the Beth Tzedek in 2015. Plans for a book based on the exhibit began right after the opening. Sadly, Jay did not live to see the launch of the publication in June 2007. It is dedicated in his memory. Copies have been donated to many libraries, and Calgary Jewish Federation and other local organizations have often presented a copy as a gift to visiting speakers and dignitaries. Our Historical Society presents a copy to every bar and bat mitzvah through our local synagogues.
Since 2007, our major projects have taken a different direction. With the increasing disappearance of built heritage, it was deemed important to mark a long-standing Jewish physical presence in our city. To that end, since 2011, JHSSA has installed historic markers at the sites of the former House of Jacob Synagogue, the former Smith-Built Hats Factory, and the Earlton Cemetery. These plaque dedication ceremonies were accompanied by informative and entertaining programs. We have also provided research assistance for plaques installed by municipal and private bodies. Our 2017 Building Community Project served to highlight in a formal way many sites important to our history. Researched by our historian laureate, Harry Sanders, and funded by a Canada 150 grant, the project included a guided walking tour, an AGM program, and a virtual tour still available on our website. Harry co-presented the AGM program with Katie Baker, our office manager and program planner, who had joined the Society's team in 2011. The Jay and Barbara Joffe archives form the heart of the JHSSA and its activities. Archival items have been accumulated mostly through individual and family donations, often a few pieces at a time, a photograph or two, a folder of papers, a carton of memories. Since the Society is not the official repository for any one organization, we depend on voluntary transfers of records to build our collections. Yet many of our communal organizations turn to us when researching their own history, often in preparation for celebrating milestones. After many years of slowly collecting archival material, in 2016, we were successful in our application for Library and Archives Canada's Documentary Heritage Community Program grant to fully organize and describe our archival holdings. This is slow and painstaking work, but necessary to enable better access to the valuable information held within the boxes and boxes of documents on our shelves. The treasures from our archives are the cornerstone of our mandate of preservation and education. They have been and will continue to be used for research and for our own exhibits, publications, and programs.
We'll close with just 2 examples of archival items that have served as the inspiration for a number of our educational activities. The House of Jacob Marriage Register, compiled largely by Rabbi Simon Smolensky, was donated to the Society by his granddaughter, Minnie Gordon Siegel, in 1994. The register lists local Jewish marriages from 1917 to 1934 and includes the names of the new couple, the witnesses, and the clergy, as well as the date and location of the wedding. It has served to answer numerous research questions, and it formed the centerpiece for an issue of Discovery dedicated to weddings. It has also been the springboard for some of our favorite programs through the decades. The Land of Promise exhibit featured a panel on weddings. After all, wedding photos form a large part of our photo collection, and these have been especially popular with our donors and the public. These Land of Promise panels were reused in 1997 in an expanded wedding exhibit at the Beth Tzedek, which also featured the storied wedding gown worn by Phyllis Waterman Rubin and several other brides during the war years. The touching story of that special dress was featured at our 2008 AGM program, The Way We Wore, and at our 2010 Wedding Show and Tell Spring program. Who can forget the story of Charna Manelson's blue wedding dress, worn in July 1940, when the date of her marriage to Archie Shapiro was moved up almost overnight, when the government suddenly announced that all unmarried men would immediately be conscripted. Leona Levitt-Bell's homemade wedding gown was part of our 2004 Memories and Mementos program. Our annual wedding theme display at the JCC entrance always draws enthusiastic comments and spurs the donation of additional photos. We now have wedding photos and documents dating from over a century.
Another significant archival acquisition is the Jewish War Veterans of Canada Post Number 2 Fonds. Our society always had close ties to Post Number 2 and its leadership. With the dissolution of the organization, its papers and photographs were donated to our archives to ensure their preservation. Our military theme displays at the JCC entrance every November is always popular with visitors to the building. Editor Jack Switzer devoted entire Discovery issues to the military in 1995 and 2006. The fate and stories of those who served have been of special interest to researchers through the years. In 2011, our society honored our living veterans at our AGM program for Freedom and Country. In preparation for that evening, a number of veterans were interviewed about their service. As with many of our programs, the event solicited more questions and also some new information. Subsequently, a new project was conceived to consolidate all the information available about Southern Alberta's Jewish veterans within a database that could serve as a convenient research tool. With funding from Jewish War Veterans Post Number 2, Veterans Affairs Canada, and the Gert Family Foundation, and with additional information gleaned from military records housed at Library and Archives Canada, our Veterans Database launched in 2013. It is available to the public on our Society's website. The information it contains served as the kernel for a 2015 Historic Calgary Week program presented at the military museums, and for the 2017 Attestations, a military mosaic of unexpected stories, program by Roberta Kerr, who continues to amend and expand the Society's military subject files and the database itself. This resource was also consulted to update the Jewish War Veterans Wall of Honor at the Community Center in 2019. For over 30 years of capable leadership under Presidents Jay Joffe, Sheldon Smithens, Jack Switzer, Betty Sherwood, and Sandra Lipton, and with a dedicated board of directors, many of whom served numerous terms, and with the help of devoted volunteers and committed supporters, our society has grown to be an established community organization and a respected member of the wider archival community. We have a larger office, quality display cabinets, and more archival storage space. While developing our collections according to established best practices and standards, we have accomplished our goals of sharing the stories of Southern Alberta's Jewish communities with an ever wider audience through new approaches, partnerships, and technologies. Who could have foretold that we would be holding our AGM and honoring our seniors through Zoom, or that, including this year's group, we have celebrated a total of 574 octogenarians. Yet it should not be such a surprise, for Jay Joffe's vision was to make our history accessible to everyone by any and all means possible. We are proud to have fulfilled that vision. Obviously, 2020 marks a new chapter for JHSSA and the Southern Alberta Jewish community. Together with your support, this society is committed, as always, to continue to record, to preserve, and to recount our history as it unfolds.
Thank you